Bessie Oster, thank you very much for coming into the podcast. This is our second conversation of all time, and it's been a little bit since we've done a podcast episode, but I'm very excited to talk to you and learn a little bit more about how you got to Gilman, basically. So
cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So maybe we can start out with a question that I used for my short fiction class. I'm teaching this elective on short fiction, and I feel like this was a decent icebreaker that I did the other day just to get them talking and comfortable in class. Friday night, you've got three options: a concert, a sporting event, or a movie. What are you most likely going to do?
No question, concert.
Concert? That was me too. What was the best concert you've ever gone to, or a concert you want to go to?
Ooh. I think I'm going to go with a concert I want to go to, because that is something I miss very much about life in the pandemic. I just feel like those opportunities to gather and see live music have been obliterated for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who do I want to see?
Have you been to one since the pandemic?
No, nothing. Yeah. I haven't been to a movie or a sporting event. I haven't been
to a movie in years, I don't think. A movie in theaters. I mean, no reason, right? Like, you just watch it on your living room couch.
Yeah. I haven't been to anything on Broadway. I mean, I just moved here from New York, and so the opportunities to see live theater. Hamilton, I haven't seen it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bummer.
How long did you live in New York?
22 years.
22 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I went to college on the West Coast, left Portland, Oregon on my bike, rode my bike down the West Coast and through the Southwest.
Wow.
Came back to Baltimore for Thanksgiving of 2000, and moved to New York City.
You rode your bike down the entire West Coast.
I did.
Wow.
With a couple of hitchhiking.
That is pretty awesome.
Stops on the way, but yeah.
Cool. So you grew up in Baltimore, around this area, Roland Park.
I did.
And then you have some connection to Gilman already, right? Your dad.
My dad is a Gilman graduate, and my uncle. And I had a lot of friends from Gilman growing up. Yeah. What
did your dad really tell you about Gilman, and like, what was your sense of Gilman as you were kind of growing up in this area?
I knew Mr. Finney's name pretty early on in my life. He was a inspiring figure in my dad's life, and in fact, when my dad turned 60, I did a project. I was living in Japan at the time. I had a fellowship to live in Tokyo working with homeless people, and so I was away for his big birthday, and I decided that I had just been to the National Gallery in Tokyo and seen the Japanese woodcut prints with many views of Mount Fuji. The famous one is the wave.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, and so I had this idea that I was going to do 60 views of Bob Oster, inspired by the views of Mount Fuji. So I started reaching out to all kinds of people, and I reached out to his friends and colleagues and some of my childhood friends who knew him, and obviously our family. But I also reached out to Mr. Finney, who was incredibly gracious and, totally remembered my dad and offered this very vivid, sweet memory of my dad on the football field as a senior, and the sort of glorious moment that he'd had. And I was grateful at the time for this poignant memory, because I knew my dad held Mr. Finney in such high regard. But now that I work in a school, the idea that Mr. Finney, who had thousands of students in his care, however many years later that was.
I know.
40 years later, remembered my dad was totally impressive.
Yeah, that's the kind of story or the legends of Mr. Finney that I love, is that how he knew everyone's name and remembered all these little details about every kid here, and just very, very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it was neat. It was really neat.
And that's kind of the podcast is called Path to Follow podcast after that documentary about Mr. Finney's life that came out a few years ago. So perfect. You're back where you need to be here.
Yeah. Well, I have not seen that, but I will be sure to.
Yeah. I think I
out.
have it in the library. It's a great one.
Cool.
So what is it like for you to be at Gilman so far? I met you in the printing room a couple weeks ago. We talked a little bit, and it was your first day or two here?
Yeah.
What's it been like for you?
I mean, that is sort of a bigger question about what it's like to be back in Baltimore, because I have spent many years making choices not to be in Baltimore, even though my family is here and I adore my family and I'm back here visiting frequently. But I think I left Baltimore with the sort of hypothesis that there was a great big world out there that was bigger than the world that I had known growing up in independent school. And, I went to St. Paul's, and living in Roland Park as a kid. And I was very, very eager to see what else was out there. And I took a gap year. And as I mentioned, I went to school on the West Coast. And then after college, moved to New York. And I've had awesome opportunities throughout my life to live in other countries. And so I think I had an idea about what Baltimore was that was sort of a single story that was pretty limited. And being back here has blown that up entirely in good ways. And I think that is true of Gilman as well. I mean, I think I thought of it as this sort of academically rigorous, sporty school, and that it, educated a certain type of boy. And what I've discovered pretty immediately is that it's got a really awesome crew of people, students, faculty, and it's not as, I think, one-dimensional as I had in my mind at
Definitely want to talk about
age 18.
Definitely want to talk about that. Shifting the perspective is always an interesting question, especially for people that went here and now are, looking at the school and how it is today. But I'm also curious about like all of these travels that you've had or living in different countries and what maybe inspired that, and whether like did you enjoy growing up in Baltimore? Did you like Baltimore and just want to get out and see some other places, or did you not really like the area growing up and that led you to travel different places, or are you just kind of a traveler?
No, I think honestly both. I think I liked growing up here and I loved the people who I'm connected to here. And I felt like I wanted to understand what was happening beyond the world that I knew immediately. And travel presented that opportunity and sort of confirmed that hypothesis. I mean, I feel like I graduated from high school and I was like, I know that there is a lot happening in this world. And I went to Australia.
Wow.
Had an epic year-long adventure and
Study abroad?
Sort of a
Gap year?
Yeah, gap year. That was kind of a unfolding adventure in real time.
Tell me about Australia. I'm curious.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I went with the idea that I was going to be there for 6 weeks, and when I got there, discovered that there was a backpacker scene, and it was pretty easy to work and travel and sort of stop in places and get to know the area, work, maybe in a youth hostel, or I don't know, there's a program called Woofing where you can work on organic farms. I worked on a sailboat that traveled around the Great Barrier Reef, and that was pretty amazing. I worked in a shoe store, I worked in a bakery, and definitely the most...
All in 1 year.
Yeah. I mean, these were all sort of short stint. I would travel to a new town and figure out what I could do to keep my adventure going.
So you traveled around Australia as well?
All around,
okay.
Yeah.
My dad spent a year there, I think a year after college, and he always says, like, he got homesick, I think, towards the end and came back, and he's always like, I kind of wish I spent more time there, and, and because How often are you going to go to Australia?
Yeah,
Not really.
it's a really long way.
Yeah.
But the craziest job I had was I joined a traveling circus for 3 months, and
Wow.
that was it was an exciting adventure in contrast to the 11 years prior that I'd spent at the same school.
How did you get involved in the circus?
There were flyers posted around Melbourne saying circus helpers wanted. My friend and I called, and I was hired as a horse groomer. I also made cotton candy. I was the back end of a 2-man Chinese lion that came out and sort of paraded around the audience while they were setting up for the actual lion act.
Oh my God.
I was promoted to the front end briefly, and it was amazing. It was a totally wild, unplanned, sort of life unfolding adventure that I'm so grateful to have been able to have.
And you stayed in hostels when you were over there? You just kind of bopped around?
Yep.
I'm
not sure that that there's a gap year program that I could recommend that would exactly replicate this. But
that sounds so cool. So what was it like coming back from that entire experience, and then you went off to college, right, on the West Coast?
Yeah. This is funny that I'm talking so much about my parents' birthdays. I came back to surprise my mom for her 50th birthday, and it was exciting to, come back and see my family after almost a year away, and it was awesome. But I had deferred from college for a year. I actually decided that I was going to apply to a different college during that year, so I was now going to another school also on the West Coast. But when I got back, and this is also sort of a funny Gilman connection, but the Donald Bentley Food Pantry, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Donald Bentley was a Gilman student who was killed, and in his memory, the Donald Bentley Food Pantry was created by another Gilman student named A.J. Julius, who, I don't know, he might have graduated in maybe 1990. But there was a group of us who from different schools around Baltimore who were involved in operating the food pantry. And I got involved when I was in about 8th grade, and then was extremely involved through my high school years. And when I left to go to Australia, we had sort of created a succession plan for the food pantry, where it was going to be operated not by students. But when I got back from Australia, within a few days, there was a fire in the building, and the food pantry where it is now in East Baltimore, it was seriously burned, and we couldn't operate out of it. And so we, a couple of us who are still around, Josh Julius, who was AJ's younger brother, also a Gilman grad, and I primarily started running the food pantry out of the back of a semi-truck in a lot across the street that I think is actually owned by a Gilman family, Flanagan. And anyway, so I ended up taking another 6 months off to work on getting the food pantry back up and running, and then went to college 6 months, the spring fall semester of what would have been my sophomore year. And so to your earlier question about what it's like to be back in Baltimore, one of the first things that I did when I moved back was to go back to the food pantry and see how things were going. And Josh Julius is still operating the food pantry every Saturday, giving out food to families in East Baltimore. And Josh suggested that I reach out to Donnell Thompson here to just, sort of make that connection with the food pantry. And so I had a great first meeting with him, and and I am a health educator, but I believe that really good health education happens when it's sort of multi-pronged and interdisciplinary. And so I hope that I can find opportunities to work with Donnell.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Health education and in support of the food pantry and other initiatives that Gilman is working on.
That's great. Yeah.
That was a long answer.
No, but that's awesome. That told me a lot about just how that all came back full circle for you moving back here.
Yeah.
And really your involvement with Gilman growing up in Roland Park. Is Roland Park different than what you remember it? Like is it a different kind of town? And I walk through the town every day. I live right down the street.
Yeah.
I wonder what it was like for you when you grew up here.
I loved growing up in Roland Park. It's so beautiful, and a friend group that was from the neighborhood that I loved, and I belonged to the Roland Park pool and was on swim team, and those are all really, really great memories. And so, when my family was thinking about moving back to Baltimore, Roland Park was definitely high on my list of places that I'd like to live. You probably know that the real estate market in Baltimore is really crazy right now, and houses get sold or bought, within hours of going onto the market. And so when we saw a house in Roland Park that happened to be on the same street that I grew up on, while I wasn't planning to move back to the exact same block that I grew up on.
Got to jump on it.
That's how it went down, and it's been great. But so I already had a very warm feeling about this area, but I don't know. I think in the same way that I was saying, I kind of had a one-dimensional understanding of Baltimore that is true for Roland Park as well. And now I'm like, oh wow, there are bike lanes here and a farmer's market, and it's just been joyful to rediscover this neighborhood as an adult. Eddie's still rocking it. I don't have the same charge account that I did in high school that I took probably too much advantage of.
Yeah, well, how could you not? It's right there. I've got to hit the Starbucks every time I walk by, but
that was not there.
Yeah, the banks. So I want to get back a little bit onto, you come back from Australia, and then you're going out to the West Coast for college. What made you want to come back from being out west? You go out west. I feel like a lot of people stay out there after college, and you wanted to come back and move to New York, I guess. What was that all about, that transition?
I loved being on the West Coast. Portland, Oregon is an amazing town.
Have not been, but Bend, Oregon is somewhere that I want to get to. I've heard good things about that place. Yeah.
I wanted to come back to the East Coast. I felt like it was a little too far from my family.
Yeah. And
I had a lot of friends going to New York after school, some of them for graduate school and some of them, because that's where they were from. And so we sort of had a cohort, like a squad, if you will.
Yes. Yep.
That ended up in New York right after college, and it was a really fun time. I didn't have a job when I first got there, and that was...
So you're living there trying to find...
I had an apartment, and I had paid my first and last month's rent, so I got there and had at least 30 days accounted for, and that was about it. And
did you know what you wanted to do?
I did. I wanted to work in social services. All through college, I worked at a women's shelter in Oregon, and so I knew I wanted to work in the kind of social services world, ideally with teenagers, maybe homeless teens.
Mm-hmm. And where did that interest or drive, passion come from? Working with teens and younger people?
I think my interest was more in social services than with teenagers initially. And then I'm trying to remember that time. I ended up getting a job. I worked for a temp agency. I was a really fast typist, which gave me an edge in the temp agency world. So I got placed as a temp at Goldman Sachs, which is a big investment firm, and I was in their HR department helping their HR team develop their interviewing skills. And so I just would go to Goldman Sachs every day and get interviewed over and over and over and over by people by their staff, and they were filmed.
You were helping them perfect their ability to, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you can help me with the podcast a little bit.
I don't know about that.
How am I doing?
You're great. It's good questions. But it was, it was helping me develop the ability to be in an interview. And so it was kind of a win-win. Maybe, anyway. It was a great experience. So then my next job at the temp agency was at a nonprofit, and I ended up getting hired permanently. And it was a nonprofit that worked with homeless youth in Times Square with a particular focus on serving LGBTQIA plus teens who were marginalized because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And it was an amazing organization, and the time was right before September 11th, and then during and following September 11th, and that was a time in New York where there was this incredible, obviously devastating event, but followed by this sort of incredible community, like coalescing of community. And so I think working within that setting under those circumstances, it was a very powerful experience for me as, early in my career, and I think really cemented my interest in working with teenagers and feeling like I potentially had the opportunity to positively impact somebody's life, especially if they were dealing with something that was tricky.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that that you were doing something that you were passionate about, and it seemed like you knew that you wanted to do kind of right since you moved to New York. Even though you didn't have a job then, you still kind of knew what you were interested in, what you were looking for. And one of my college coaches always told this story that stuck with me, is that he was working maybe at a bank, I think an investment bank in New York, for a while. And after September 11th, he completely changed his life. He said, I don't really think I'm passionate about this. I don't think I want to do this long term. And he got into coaching lacrosse, played lacrosse in college, and that's what he really, wanted to do with his life. And I always remember that story, that, he was doing something that maybe he didn't love it. And that moment, that day, completely changed everything for him. And I think, you said it solidified for you that that's what you wanted to be doing.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at those moments individually, but also kind of as a culture, those like inflection point moments. And, and I think in a lot of ways, the pandemic is proving to be that for many people, where, we've sort of collectively had whether it's the opportunity to be, because of being, like quarantined, or just the significance of the impact. But I think for many people, it's been, a moment to say, like, is this the life that I want to be living? And, and I think that certainly contributed to my family's major move to Baltimore. And, for us, it's been a really good thing and a positive change, but a big change. And
yeah, moving from New York.
Yeah.
Did you seek out Gilman because you always, you had that history with Gilman, or did you hear about the opening, or how did you kind of get involved here at Gilman during the pandemic, really?
Yeah. It's interesting. Once we knew we were moving, and I started looking at job opportunities in Maryland, I was very struck that there were not a lot of schools that seemed to have dedicated health educators. And in New York, over the course of the last 10 years, most schools have moved in that direction, so that they have on staff a dedicated health educator. And so, I was sort of like, that's curious. Maybe in Maryland, that's not sort of how things operate. And I have been consulting with a few different schools in the area, doing some health education work. But when I saw the Gilman opportunity posted, I was like, "Ooh, it's Gilman, and
Yeah.
it's a health educator job." And so
It's
I was
perfect.
very excited to see the opportunity and apply, and be offered the position.
So what are some of the things that you feel are important to kind of bring to the health classroom at Gilman? 9th and 10th grade, you said you're working with just 9th grade this year, right?
Yes, currently 9th grade health and guidance.
So what are some of the things that you're kind of bringing into the classroom you think is important for these 9th graders to know, to realize, to understand, for their high school experience and after?
Yeah, good question. Well, let me start by saying that Nurse Meacham has taught health for a very long time, and so the impetus for creating this position was that she obviously has her hands full this year with everything COVID related. So
Right, cannot imagine that.
Yeah, I can't either. She's a superhuman.
Yeah, for sure.
So out of the work that she's been doing for many years, my position was created, and so I am picking up where she's left off, and she has taught a certain set of subjects over the course of the year that I'm sticking with, although I think I do bring my own kind of flair to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what's been very cool to discover about Gilman is that there is amazing work happening in lots of different pockets of the school, and so I'm excited, first and foremost, to be teaching 9th grade health and picking up where Edie left off. But in addition, I'm hopeful that over time I'll be able to sort of pull together some of the things that are already happening here. That for example, Ms. Summers' talk program in the middle school is outstanding, and so thinking about the way health education can build over the course of a boy's life here at Gilman is really exciting. Freshman fifth is another area where the peer educators are incredible, and I'm enjoying getting to know them. But thinking about the ways in which the work that they're doing around social emotional support for freshmen can complement what we're doing in the health education classroom, where students are learning about some of the kind of perennial health topics, mental health, nutrition, sex ed, alcohol and drug prevention. That's kind of the bulk of the 9th grade curriculum. And I think the flair that I bring is that I'm very interested in skills-based health education. I think for many years health education has been very content-oriented, and that is an important component. But I think in addition, helping students develop the skills to do something with that content is really a high priority for me. And so I'll give you an example. In our nutrition lessons, I'm interested that students know what the basic nutrients are, but I'm probably more interested in holding some space for them to think about their own food choices given their nutritional goals based on who they are and their bodies, and then doing some very concrete menu planning around their nutritional goals and the food choices that they're inclined to make.
I don't think I ever really thought about what I was eating and how it affected me until college and playing a sport in college, and having to sit in class all day and then go to practice and have the energy to do all that. Usually when you're growing up, you kind of just eat whatever's in the cupboard or whatever looks good.
Right, totally.
And I think that's so important for a high school student, especially the athletes. We have such an emphasis on sports here, and they're all out there in the afternoon, sweating and running around and expending all this energy. And if they don't eat right, it affects you, right?
Right. They're, a person's body, especially when you're young, they're strong and generally healthy, and so they get pretty far regardless of what they eat. But I think the opportunity to think about how to maximize their
it's an edge, I think, for the sports teams.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you eat well, you'll do better.
Right.
It's just pretty simple.
It impacts your energy and your endurance, and makes a difference.
So where do you start when you start the year off? What do you like to really begin with? Nutrition unit, or do you structure in units, or how do you begin the year?
Yeah, Edie started with stress, and I keep saying Edie. Nurse Meacham started with stress, and which I think makes a lot of sense given this moment in time. I think the pandemic has had real effects on everybody's mental health. Mm-hmm. So thinking about coping skills around stress and anxiety is critical right now. Mm-hmm. And next, she covered alcohol and other drug prevention and decision making. And so I picked up with that, and then began nutrition. And now we're moving into sex ed season.
All right.
Yeah, which will take us through the end of the year.
Okay, so that's a long unit.
Well, I only really see students once a month. So there are 8 lessons in ninth grade health and 8 guidance lessons in ninth grade health. So we see Dr. Mo and I alternate between seeing groups. Yeah.
All right, so stress and anxiety, that's number one. That's most important, or that's when you begin the year, I guess. What are the practical things that, and I did talk to Christina Kim about this a little bit, but some things that they can do, because I was telling you on the way over here, I've got 80-minute classes and I just taught the 3rd period, and they've just been sitting on a dreary Friday afternoon. It's probably for a teacher, the hardest time slot, you can imagine, to get their attention and get them interested and get them excited about reading whatever we're reading in class. And, they come in there. I did a 3-minute, total stillness, no movement, no tinkering, no texting, no lying down either, because you don't want to go to sleep.
Right.
But just 3 minutes of nothing. And I feel like that is helpful. I'm trying to work that in a little bit at the beginning of the periods.
Yeah, I love that.
But I think that stress and anxiety is so important for the high school students, and some things that they can do on their own to manage that a little bit.
Yeah. I totally agree that in general, I think high schools can be a very stressful time, and at this moment in particular. And coping strategies are so individual and personal. But I think that behavioral science research has made the benefits of mindfulness pretty clear. Studies corroborate again and again how incredibly helpful it is to develop the skill of paying attention on purpose. And that's the definition of mindfulness that I use as a teacher. But it's our brains are supposed to be able to kind of be all over the place, and there's evolutionary benefit to that, and the skill of being able to focus and pay attention on purpose and gain some mastery of our own tendencies to freak out, whether it's about, a test we're taking or something that's happening socially, is very real and human, and learning how to cope with that through the practice of mindfulness. And mindfulness can be breathing, right? It can be a mantra. It can be a guided meditation. It can be exactly as you just described from your class. There's so many different ways that can happen. And I think for all of us, there are different things that work better or worse, and even on a given day. So I always say to my students, keep trying different practices, because there may be something that feels like it's beneficial to you, but you try something and you don't like it, just let it go and try something else.
Do you practice mindfulness on your own?
I do.
Yeah.
There have been phases of my life where I am more disciplined than others, but I have two small children, or they're not that small, but I have two children, and we often have some mindfulness practice to help wind down before going to sleep, and I find myself doing breathing exercises. I'm a big fan of box breathing.
I don't know box breathing. No.
It's where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you hold for 4 seconds. So it's, sort of mentally you're making a box with your breath. And if 4 seconds is too long, it can be.
How long do you do that for?
A couple of minutes. I mean, often I'll do that if I find myself, sort of becoming anxious in a moment, like if I'm, have to make a speech in front of the whole school or something like that. I would imagine, that would be a moment when I would do box breathing to try and kind of get myself to a place where I could pay attention on purpose and not be sort of hijacked by my own anxiety.
What is the science behind? So I do this Wim Hof breathing.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
I love Wim Hof. It's an 11-minute video on YouTube. That's the only one I use. It's the same one. I go to it every time. And I mean, you just breathe in and out really fast, and then you hold your breath for which seems like forever, because it's only a minute and a half, but you're struggling a bit, at least when you first start doing it. And then you breathe out, and then you just do it 3 times. But I think you feel better after doing that than you do exercising. You have this euphoric state after that. What is what's the science to all this stuff? The breathing exercises.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are neuroscientists who could explain it with a lot more sophistication than I can. But I think Wim Hof in particular, he's also the guy that recommends taking ice cold showers.
I do that too a little bit after I work out, because it's, it feels good, and you just feel good after. You don't feel good during it.
Yeah. No, I can't imagine. It sounds terrible. But but I think the whole idea is that you're shifting your parasympathetic nervous system, and you're sort of resetting, which is, kind of getting you out of that part of your brain which is on autopilot, and getting you into a place where you can think about what it is that you want to be thinking about. And so, I think that idea of a reset is one that can come in handy in a variety of situations.
Yeah. In the classroom for sure. And I think
on the athletic field as well.
Yeah, that's true. I think if I knew more about mindfulness techniques as an athlete, I didn't really use the breathing or the meditation much in high school or in college, and it helps you focus so much more. It helps you settle in, be calmer, not react as quickly.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Yeah, I think one way that it's described that I really relate to is that it helps you sort of build in a little bit of space between, sort of what's happening and your reactions to it. And that little bit of space can be just what you need to enact your own best thinking. Yes,
very true. Did you come across this recently in your position, or have you been doing this for a while and known about mindfulness before it became hot button topic?
That's a good question.
Has it been in your life for a while?
I had an English teacher in high school who practiced mindfulness, but she was sort of the only person I knew who did that. And then, you're absolutely right, it's been sort of a craze in the last decade.
Well, I'm wondering, because you talked about your experiences in Japan, and I know just the Eastern, this is kind of what they do in the East, is mindfulness and meditation techniques. And I actually went to a Buddhist monastery to just to check it out and see what it was like, because I'm into meditation and my friend is into it, and he was like, yeah, there's this Blue Cliff Monastery in the Catskill Mountains that I've been wanting to go to for a while. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'm not doing anything that weekend, I'll meet you there. And you just show up, and there are there's a massive meditation hall where you just go and you like sit for an hour, like 3 times during the day. And then you do walking meditations. And there are all these Vietnamese monks. There are like probably 50 Vietnamese monks and a couple people who just go and stay there for however long. And by the end of the weekend, I was like, all right, I'm ready to get back to living. But that they do that every day, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
But one thing that I like that you might be interested in, they have this bell that goes off every so often, kind of at random times there. And I think it's another pretty cool technique because when it goes off, everyone just stops what they're doing until the bell sounds out, and you're just kind of in the moment, and then you resume whatever it is you're doing. I think that was one of the coolest parts of it because you know all about the meditation stuff. It's pretty like commonly talked about these days, but something like that is kind of interesting for a stress anxiety point of view. Is just when the bell goes off, stop whatever you're doing, and then you can continue.
Yeah, I love that idea of it being sort of built in to what's happening. Although, I think one of the amazing things about using your breath as a point, as your kind of tool for practicing mindfulness is that it is also built in, right? It is accessible all the time. But I like that idea of a bell. I don't think the school bell is doing quite the same thing.
No. That's when you rush out of the room.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting toward the end here. I know you have to run, so a lot to talk about. Maybe we can get you back on here.
I know. I really went there. I shared it all.
Yeah, there's more to talk about for sure. But let's get to your book rec for today for the people listening.
All right. Well, this was tough. Picking one book. I thought a lot about it, and I generally like nonfiction. I really like. I'm definitely a people person, and I like knowing people's stories. I am also dyslexic, and so I'm a slow reader, although I enjoy reading. But sometimes I like books that are shorter, or I like short stories. But anyway, I selected Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, which is a book that I read. I have it in hard copy because I bought it right when it first came out and read it and loved it. And I was reminded of it recently for a couple of different reasons. One, Ta-Nehisi Coates is from Baltimore, and so moving back here, I had a moment of feeling related, and this is a book that is a letter to his son, and I read the book before I had children, but now thinking about his experience in Baltimore, his experience having a Black son and navigating the world as a parent is just, I don't know, it was relatable to me in ways that felt incredibly human and unrelatable in ways that reminded me of my own privilege. And I don't know, I loved reading this book at the time, and I loved kind of coming back to it. I was thinking about it again. He went to, at least for a time, to Howard University, and this week there's been such horrible news about threats of violence at historically Black universities, and that, it's devastating. I like to think we're sort of spiraling through time, moving forward in terms of, our quest for justice, and moments like that are just I think, brutal reminder of how much work there is to do in the way of anti-racism. And I think also the fact that he was writing to his son and working in a boys' school is a new adventure for me. And I'm very interested in the work of educating boys, especially given the topics that I'm covering through health education. And I think that these are nuanced conversations that I hope we will have in the classroom around sexual consent and around identity and around, sort of what all of our responsibilities are when it comes to decision making about different aspects of our lives. So yeah, that was again a long answer, but this is a great book, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to remember it and reconnect to it.
Great, thank you. It's amazing how a story in the form of a letter is so appealing to people on the outside reading it. Like, he wrote this to his son. I mean, I don't know what he had in mind when he wrote it, but it's directed at someone specifically.
Yeah.
And it has such a wide reach.
I know it's intimate in a way that makes, I don't know, for me, feels like an opportunity to connect on a pretty personal level.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. And
thank you.
I just don't want to have you here too long. I know you have something to run to, but thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for the book rec. It was fun talking to you. Hopefully, hopefully we can get you on here again, because those topics that you teach in health education are so important, and for our guys to listen to this, or whether they have you in class or not, and even for the older students who maybe don't have you in class, all of this stuff is so important.
Well, I'm here for all the students. So whether you have me in class or whether you're seeing me in the hall, my door is open, and I'm here to answer. I've gotten a lot of interesting questions over the years, and if I don't know the answer, I'll get back to you on it. But you can really ask me anything.
All right. Well, thank you very much.